Welcome to Healthy Living. I'm Lori Johnson. Thanks for joining us. Our topic today is the importance of joining together the body and the spirit for overall great health. My guest is award-winning author, lawyer, and speaker Justin Whitnell Earley, author of the new book, The Body Teaches the Soul. Justin, great to see you. Thanks so much for being with us today.
You're so welcome. It's so great to be talking to you again, Lori.
So this book really combines biblical wisdom with modern neuroscience, which is fantastic to help your readers renew their body and their mind. Why did you write the book?
I wrote this book out of personal experience and really personal failure. So part of my story, Lori, is that I was a former missionary to China, turned corporate lawyer, and I still practice law today. But in that transition, as I moved from the lifestyle of being a missionary to the lifestyle of being a lawyer, I collapsed into terrible mental unhealth. So early in my law career, I had really severe panic attacks and insomnia, even at some points, suicidal thoughts. And I was trying to figure out, I was wrestling in this stage of my life with how is it that my head can be over here, and yet while my habits are over here, and my heart seems to be following the habits. And it was a time in my life where the Lord taught me that if your head goes one way and your habits go the other, your heart tends to follow the habits. And I really wrestled with the physical side of that. I really wrestled with, why does it seem to make such a difference of whether I exercise or how I eat, whether I'm meditating or breathing carefully? Why does it seem to affect my peace? That I thought that was spiritual stuff. And so the process of researching and writing this book, I came to see that God has made us embodied creatures. And thus the habits, the physical habits of our body are all very spiritual, for better or for worse. And so really the last decade of my life has been devoted to practicing spiritual disciplines alongside physical disciplines so that the habit and the head can be united and lead the whole heart towards a life of following Jesus.
The Bible tells us that the body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, and yet for so many of us, those of us who are believers, our body and our spirit are very separate things. And, we talk about preaching this gospel of peace when inside our bodies we're racked with just incredible anxiety. And you talked about it with your own life, and I also know you have small children. So so many of us are dealing with careers, children, and all the things that are going on in the world, the news and social media. It's just very anxiety producing. And I'm sure that this is a message, don't you think, that resonates with so many Christians today? We see this with faith leaders sometimes who just are physically exhausted, right?
Yes. Well, I think one of the great problems of our modern moment is how to understand mental health struggles from a rooted and deeply biblical perspective. And I think one of the things that I've come to learn in researching and writing this book is that generally the world makes two big mistakes. They either ignore the body and say, really everything important in life is spiritual, and thus all solutions for everything are spiritual. Or they idolize the body and they say, really, the physical is all there is. Really, you're just a bunch of, neurons and brain chemicals. And so every solution to life is medical. And I want to tell you that the Bible does not see life in terms of those extremes. It tells you don't ignore the body. You were made physical by God, but don't idolize the body because you were also made spiritual by God. Instead, image God through the body. This is the paradigm of Genesis, when Genesis 2:7 says that God took dust and breathed the spirit of life into it. There you have physical and spiritual, and a living soul was born. That's the King James translation of Genesis 2:7. And that idea means that everything in our life is always a divine combination of the physical and the spiritual. And we're not going to image God into the life we were made for if we're ignoring or idolizing one. So with mental health, for example, Christians should be the first to agree with psychiatry and say that you need correct top-down thinking. You need to order your mind. And Christians are usually really big on this, right? Get the truth in there. It is absolutely essential to a healthy brain. But we should also be saying you need to order your physical life, because if you think and know all the right things, but are dishonoring God in your body, you will unsurprisingly end up with a life that is racked by depression or anxiety, not because you don't know the truth, but because you don't put it into practice.
Mm.
And this is the biblical story, the worldview over time, that was not just about knowing God, it's about following him and loving him in a physical life. So I really want to, in The Body Teaches the Soul, combine these things for people and say, that's the good life you were made for.
There is so much temptation these days to go down the wrong path when it comes to caring for your body, especially when it comes to things like food. Eating the wrong kinds of food, and also when it comes to anxiety, it's so tempting to get on social media, which is, we know, so very addictive. You talk in your book about developing habits,
Yes.
and talk about the 10 habits that you suggest in this book to realign your body and your soul. And you talk about these breath prayers. Can you sort of elaborate on what breath prayers are?
Yes. So first, on habit, I write in terms of habit. And this book, The Body Teaches the Soul, I'm holding it up right now, are 10 essential habits for a healthy and holy life. Because I believe it's the ordinary routines that form us in the most extraordinary and spiritual ways. So one of my bents in my writing is to always talk about how can the deep and rich theological truth of the Bible be made ordinary and routine practices. And so in this book, you'll find every single area that we look at, breathing, for example, has a physical discipline and a spiritual discipline. Because what I really want people to do is to take big ideas like their body is spiritual and make it practical. So, Laura, you asked about breathing. It's a great example of it. My physical practice in the breathing chapter is to learn to box breathe. And this is a breathing exercise that's been well demonstrated to improve physical and mental health. If you practice it daily, it's the idea of inhaling slow for a few seconds. 4 is the typical amount. And you trace the box. You inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, and hold for 4 seconds. Now, if you're like me, when I first heard about this, I thought, that's not going to matter at all. This is like psychobabble. This is Eastern. This is woo-woo. How important really can breathing be to your mental health? I learned 2 things. One, breathing is actually incredibly, scientifically speaking, it's incredibly important to your health. It's the one subconscious survival function that you can actually make conscious. You can take control of your breathing, and it changes your heart rate. It changes the way you think. It changes the way you feel. And then going back to Genesis 2:7 that I told you about a minute ago, Lori, that breathing is the animating feature of existence. And actually, the Hebrew word for soul was the word for a neck or a throat. The idea was that in your throat, in your windpipe, is where your body of dust meets the spirit of air. And there is sort of a central spiritual metaphor going on in respirating. Now, you can run all kinds of places like this, but I like to sum it up like this. Breathing is sort of what unites our physicality and our spirituality. Like when we die, it's because oxygen leaves our body and that causes death. The spirit separates from the body. It's metaphorical, not physically here. So one of the things I want to do in breathing is say, we need to combine the spiritual and the physical, and combine the upper and the lower brain. And box breathing alongside breath prayers, this is the spiritual discipline, is one of the most beautiful ways to do that. I do this about every day, where I just take a verse from the Bible, let's say Psalm 23, and I box breathe it. The Lord is my shepherd. On the inhale, hold, I shall not want. And this is a beautiful way to meditate on scripture in your upper brain while regulating your emotions in your lower brain and body, and thereby sort of uniting that fullness of who you were made to be. So this is something I do all the time now for my spiritual and physical health. And it's one of the easiest habits for anybody to start, uniting their physicality and their spirituality.
It's wonderful. All right, we're going to take a quick break and be right back with Justin Whitmel Earley. The book is called The Body Teaches the Soul. Stay with us. Welcome back to Healthy Living. We are continuing our discussion with Justin Whitmel Earley, author of the new book, The Body Teaches the Soul. And Justin, before the break, you were talking about one of the habits you recommend in the book to help us renew our body and our mind, the breath prayers. Fantastic. Can you talk about another habit?
Eating is probably one of my favorite habits to talk about because it's a struggle for so many people like me. The Bible is good news. The gospel is good news for everything. And it's actually good news for the way we eat too. One of the things that you read in Genesis 2:9 is that in the garden, God made things that are beautiful to the eye and good for food. So this is Genesis 2:9. And it sets out this lovely paradigm that I want to remind Christians of. which is that eating is a gift to you. It's a feature that you need creation to sustain yourself. This is the idea that we're dependent. But in Genesis 2:9, you see not only dependence, but you see delight. Like the fruit in the garden is beautiful to look at. And take those two ends, Lori, dependence and delight. We were made to know that we need God and need creation, but also to delight in the goodness of that. I like to take those and then look at modern America today and say, I think we've traded dependence for indulgence and delight for shame. In the broken world of Western eating, we have everything available to us. We don't feel dependent. We actually feel indulgent because we have trouble controlling ourselves. And this is due to ultra processed foods. It's also due to our bad habits. But that idea of dependence turns to shame. We feel awful from what we eat and we feel bad about what we eat. And the beautiful news is that the Bible gives you a way home. It gives you practices of fasting to recover your dependence and feasting to recover that delight. And these are normative practices in the Bible throughout the Old Testament, but even think about the life of Jesus. He assumes that you'll fast. He says, when you fast, do it like this. He also assumes that you'll feast. He says, when you throw a banquet, do it like this. And in the life of Jesus, you see these beautiful ends of fasting and feasting. And, I'd love to talk about, how do you fast and what do you fast from or what is feasting like? But I'll say you can't do either of these things well unless you're holding to the ordinary discipline of moderation and restraint in between. So I call that ordinary fare. And if you put those together, this is a biblical paradigm for spiritual rhythms for eating. You're occasionally fasting, you're occasionally feasting, but most days you're honoring the command to not be mastered by anything, to eat simply, eat healthily, not just whatever you feel like, eat so that you can feel the way you need to feel to love other people in the world well. And these, I think, are wonderful practices to put into place. The chapter 3 in the book gives readers a lot of ideas on how to do this, but I want to give them normal habits to recover the spirituality of eating.
This is a prayer that we should be praying for self-control. That is one of the fruits of the Spirit. God has told us that He will give us self-control. We do need self-control when it comes to our eating. And really, maybe the first thing we need to do is make good choices about what we eat. What should we be eating and what should we be avoiding? You mentioned processed foods. These are really addictive. It's really hard to stop eating. What do you recommend a person's diet should be? Do we need to go back to the types of things that were in the Garden of Eden, plants and vegetables and whole, clean meats?
I think anybody will do well to start there. And while I am a lawyer and a writer, not a nutritionist or a dietitian, it is pretty common sense stuff. Think about the difference between God-made foods and quote unquote man-made foods. Now, the idea being that the ordinary sorts of food that we find in nature, clean meats, fresh fruits and vegetables, these do not have the sugar, the fat, the salt concentrations to spike your dopamine and create the addictive cycles of indulgence and shame. And I actually think it's really important, I go over this in a section of the book, to see that our dopamine cycles in eating highly processed food trade that dependence for indulgence and that delight for shame. So we're actually, by eating ultra-processed, man-made, quote-unquote, foods, we're living antithetically to the biblical rhythms of dependence and delight. I give a lot of examples in the book on how to reclaim this sort of natural, whole, healthy eating. And everybody's going to have a different diet, but some suggestions would be to just create some positive rhythms in your life. For example, of keeping one ingredient snacks on hand. Those are God-made foods, whole foods that won't spike your dopamine. Starting meals with protein so that you are filling yourself up in a way that you don't feel like you need to eat a lot of empty and highly processed carbs to get that. Make sure fresh fruits and vegetables are part of your daily ordinary fare. There's a lot that I want to encourage people to fast over. And there's a lot of feasting rhythms where I think we should dive into the goodness of creation. But most of life is in that ordinary fare, eating simple, healthy foods. And there's a lot of ideas for you in the book. But I just want to say recovering that is to recover a life where you're not constantly stunted emotionally into shame and guilt and frustration, but to recover a life where you actually feel fueled in order to love. Because, of course, the point of a human body is not body image. It's not even health or longevity. The point of a human body is to love God and love neighbors. And we need to think about, how do we eat so that we might love well? That takes a little bit of discipline.
Absolutely, it does. This is great advice. We're going to take another break and be right back with Justin Whitmel Earley. The book is called The Body Teaches the Soul. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Healthy Living. We are talking with Justin Whitmel Earley, the author of the new book, The Body Teaches the Soul, about how to combine the body and the spirit for overall great health. You talked about breathing and eating. Justin, talk about the importance of sleep, about developing good sleep habits. You're really big on habits.
Yeah, well, and this was close to my heart because, as I told you in my story, the first symptom of my body and spirit going wrong was my inability to sleep. And I think I was in a place like most Americans, struggling with unhealthy sleep rhythms because my life allowed no room for natural, healthy sleep. I was just so busy. I was always staying up later to do more work, waking up earlier to do more work. I was tethered to my phone. It was the last thing I did in the night. It's the first thing I did in the morning. And one of the things that I realized that was happening is that I was beginning to view my body as a machine more than a human being. And by that, I mean a machine that could be hacked for more productivity instead of a limited human being, a creature that needed rest. And that is antithetical to how God made us. We are not machines, we are human beings, which means we need sleep and rest. And just to punch into those two things really quickly, it's fascinating that the Bible on page 1 in Genesis chapter 1 sets out this paradigm that humans are made to rest like God. That is the idea to stand back from our work and to appreciate the work that God has done and that we have participated in. This is the idea of a Sabbath rhythm. And one of my spiritual disciplines in the sleep chapter is to practice the spiritual rhythm of rest, to be a Sabbath. But you also need to be practicing this on a daily basis through the physical discipline of a healthy sleep routine. This is how we cultivate on every 24-hour cycle the humility of saying, I am not God. God over Israel who neither slumbers nor sleeps, the Psalms tell us. But we are not. We actually need to learn how to stop and say it is God's work, Jesus Christ on the cross, where he says it is finished. Everything important in the world is finished. So we can learn to rest and deal with a world that is slightly unfinished because we can't finish it all. And practicing a healthy sleep routine is the idea of going to bed at relatively the same time every evening, waking up at relatively the same time, getting the phone out of your bedroom, not scrolling in bed. This is one of the low-hanging fruits of improving your sleep. Is just remove that smartphone and set a time to go to bed and say, I'm just going to lay here for an 8-hour sleep opportunity. And this will be, as it was for me, one of the most significant factors in improving your mental and physical health, just to honor the natural rhythm of sleep that God made you for.
That is wonderful advice, and so many of us struggle with getting a good night's sleep, and one of the main culprits is that phone. You're absolutely right. All right, we're going to take one final break and be right back with Justin Earley. The book is The Body Teaches the Soul. Stay with us. Welcome back, and we're talking with Justin Earley, author of the book, The Body Teaches the Soul, and we're talking about how to combine our body and our spirit in a way that honors God. You talked about so many things: eating right, sleeping right, breathing right, and talk about movement. You call it movement, not exercise, but that's what we often think of.
Yes, human bodies were made to move. And there's actually this fascinating concept in movement and exercise of anti-fragility. This is one of the main things I learned in researching the book. And this is the idea that a little bit of hard work will do your body really good, healthy outcomes. And this is kind of fascinating that in order to get stronger, you need to break down your muscles. In order to be healthier at heart, you need to strain your cardiovascular system. If you trace it with your finger, you can imagine the path of anti-fragility is you need to go down, be broken down in order to build back up to greater health. And one of the things I found so fascinating, Lori, was how much this images and patterns the life of Christ, who goes down in suffering and humility in order to bring us up in redemption. And I think one of the things that Christians can take away from movement and exercise is that mirroring that spiritual pattern of Christ in our physical life is sort of one way we can see the gospel baked into our physiology. We need to humble ourselves, find the right kind of suffering, and find the right kind of difficulty in order to be stronger, both in body and character. So I encourage Christians to find an exercise routine as a way to not just work on the health of your body, but also the health of your soul. And before anybody gets worried, about age or stage and health, I would just say, remember the exercise that is most correlated with longevity and mental health is actually just walking outside. So even if your anti-fragile push is towards getting out of the house once every other day or so and walking outside with a friend, that would actually be the most healthy thing for your life and incredibly healthy for your mind and soul too.
And walking. That's how Jesus got around. Well, unfortunately,
Yes.
Justin, we are just about out of time. Tell our viewers where they can find the book and also find out more about you.
Anybody can come find me at justinwhitmoreearly.com, or I post a lot of videos like this at Justin Whitmore Early on Instagram. So come to my website, join my email list, or come to Instagram and you'll hear a lot about these habits. But I just want everybody to know in a wrap up of a conversation like this that habits don't change God's love for you. It's just that God's love for you should change your habits, body and soul.
Absolutely. What a great way to end the program. Well, thanks so much, Justin, for joining us today and for your outstanding work. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Lori. It's been wonderful.
And thanks to you for joining in to this edition of Healthy Living. I'm Lori Johnson, and we'll see you again next week.